The house was already awake when I came in. Not loud, not warm, just aware. I closed the door behind me and stood there, my hand still resting on the knob, listening to the quiet rearrange itself. The air smelled like coffee that wasn't mine, sweet, creamed, softened for someone else's morning. The hallway light was on. It hadn't been when I left the night before. I hadn't turned it on. I took my shoes off and lined them neatly by the door. Habit, respect. The kind you practice even when no one asks you to, even when no one notices. The floor creaked once under my weight, a familiar sound. It used to feel like recognition. Now it sounded like interruption. I moved slowly, the way you do when you're not trying to be quiet, but also not trying to be heard, passing through rooms that looked the same but felt claimed. The living room couch cushions were aligned more carefully than I remembered. Someone had opened the curtains wide. Morning light spilled across the carpet without hesitation, like it had permission. I stopped near the doorway. From the kitchen, I heard voices. Evelyn's voice first, calm, assured, the voice of someone who knew where things belonged. Then Rachel's laugh, soft, comfortable, settled. I waited for Daniel's voice to join them. It didn't. I didn't announce myself. I never had to before. I stepped into the kitchen like I always did, expecting my presence to be assumed. No one looked up. Evelyn stood at the counter, slicing fruit on the cutting board with the chipped corner, the one I dropped years ago and kept anyway. Rachel sat at the table, phone in hand, her feet tucked beneath her like this was her natural place to land. "Morning," Evelyn said, eventually, not turning around. "Morning," I replied. The word felt foreign, like it had traveled farther than it should have. I poured myself coffee, black, or at least I meant to. The pot was already mixed with cream. I hesitated, then poured it anyway. Compromise had become muscle memory. Rachel glanced up and smiled. It wasn't unkind, it just wasn't personal. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked. "A little," I said. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. Daniel's chair at the table was empty. "He stepped out early," Evelyn said, reading my silence correctly. "Needed some air." I nodded. That phrase had been used a lot lately. Air, space, room. I took a sip of coffee, too sweet. I remembered when this kitchen had been empty. When Daniel and I moved in, we ate takeout on the floor because the table hadn't arrived yet. We laughed about it, promised each other we'd do things properly later. Later had come, and somehow passed me by. I looked at the fridge. The calendar was new, different handwriting, different priorities, appointments I didn't recognize, names that weren't mine. My name wasn't there. I felt the realization settle, not painfully, not dramatically, but with a dull sense of inevitability. This house was full. Everyone lived here, except me. I set my mug down quietly. The sound felt louder than it should have. "I worked overnight," I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Evelyn nodded. "That can't be good for you. You should slow down." I almost laughed. Slow down from what? From holding everything together? Rachel stood and rinsed her mug, placing it carefully on the drying rack exactly where Evelyn liked it. That detail shouldn't have mattered. It did. "We were thinking," Rachel said, not looking at me, "maybe it's time to rebalance things." Rebalance. I leaned against the counter, feeling its cool edge press into my back, grounding me. "What things?" I asked. Evelyn turned then, meeting my eyes with practiced gentleness. "This house, this family." Family. I thought of the hours I'd spent here alone, fixing things, cleaning things, waiting for things. I thought of how often I'd told myself love was patient and patience meant shrinking. "I built this place," I said quietly. "We know, and we're grateful." Grateful. The word landed like a receipt, proof of something already concluded. She slid an envelope across the counter toward me, thick, official. "Just so there's no confusion," she said. I didn't touch it. "Does Daniel know about this?" I asked. Rachel hesitated. "Yes," she said. That pause told me everything. I picked up my bag. No one stopped me. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the small changes. My shoes missing from the closet, my throw blanket folded and placed in the guest room, the hook by the door straightened. Someone had fixed it. At the front door, I paused, not because I expected someone to follow, because I needed to understand what I was leaving. I opened the door and stepped outside. The morning air was cool and clean, like it hadn't heard what just happened inside. Behind me, the door closed, and no one rushed to soften the sound. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, waiting for something. A footstep, a voice, even a sigh. Nothing came. I walked to my car and drove away. Not fast, not angry, just finished. The diner I stopped at smelled like coffee and old vinyl. The waitress didn't ask questions. She brought water first, then coffee. Black. It tasted right. I sat by the window and watched the world pass, like I was no longer required to participate in it. Cars, people, motion without intimacy. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "We'll talk later. I just need time." Time. I didn't reply. I drove again, farther this time, until the city thinned and the road opened up, until I could breathe without feeling like I was in someone else's way. The motel sign flickered vacancy in tired red letters. I checked in without small talk. The room was plain, clean enough, honest. I sat on the edge of the bed and removed my shoes, set them neatly side by side. That night, I slept without waiting for anyone to come home. In the morning, I woke with a strange clarity. Not strength, not relief, just absence. The absence of waiting. I realized how long I'd been living like a guest in my own life, how carefully I'd moved, how quietly I'd asked. That ended here. I dressed, picked up my keys, and left the room. The day was already moving, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to catch up. I didn't expect Daniel to call that day. I told myself I wouldn't answer if he did. I said it out loud in the motel room, like a rule might hold better if it heard itself spoken. But when the phone buzzed against the nightstand, my body reacted before my resolve could. His name lit the screen. I stared at it until the vibration stopped, then started again. I answered on the third ring. "Hey," he said. The word sounded lighter than it should have, like he was testing the ground, seeing if it would hold. "Hey," I replied. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I could hear traffic behind him, a car door closing, movement, life continuing on his side of the line. "I didn't know where you went," he said. I pictured him standing in the driveway, phone in hand, looking at the empty space where my car used to be. I wondered how long it took him to notice. "I needed somewhere quiet," I said. "That house is quiet," he replied. I almost laughed. "Not for me," I said. Another pause. He was good at those now, letting silence do the work he didn't want to. "Mom's worried," he said. Of course she was. "I'm fine," I replied. "You don't sound fine." I leaned back against the motel headboard and closed my eyes. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent and something older, familiar in a way that didn't ask questions. "I don't need to sound anything right now," I said. "I just need you to tell me the truth." "The truth about what?" "You knew," I said, "about the papers, about the plan. You knew before I walked into that kitchen." He exhaled slowly. "Yes." The word landed harder this time, not because I didn't expect it, but because I needed to hear it. "How long?" I asked. "Since January." January. I stared at the far wall, counting the cracks in the paint. January was when I'd picked up extra shifts, when he'd said money was tight, when his mom had started staying over more frequently, when Rachel stopped asking before changing things. So, while I was working nights, you were deciding where I fit. "No," he said quickly, "it wasn't like that." "How was it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "We just realized things weren't working," he said finally. "There was tension. You were always tired, always stressed." I thought about how often I'd come home and asked how his day had been, how rarely he'd asked the same. "And the solution," I said slowly, "was to remove me?" "Not remove," he corrected. "Create space." Space. That word again. So clean, so harmless. "You didn't talk to me. You talked around me." "I didn't want to fight." "You didn't want resistance." Silence. "I need to come by. There are things I left." "Now?" he asked. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "Okay." When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. White siding, trim I'd painted myself, windows catching the afternoon light just right. The car that used to be mine wasn't there. Rachel's was. Evelyn's. Daniel's. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, gathering myself. Not courage, clarity. The door was locked. That was new. I rang the bell. Rachel answered. "Oh," she said, "we didn't expect you." "I'm here to get my things," I replied. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house felt guarded, like it knew something I didn't anymore. Daniel stood in the living room, hands clasped, eyes tired. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. "Hi," he said. I nodded. Evelyn stood near the window, arms folded loosely, watching. "I'll be quick." No one followed me upstairs. My bedroom door was open. It didn't look like my room anymore. The dresser drawers were half empty. My clothes thinned out, neatly folded and stacked in boxes against the wall. Someone had decided what mattered. I packed slowly, carefully, the way you do when you don't want to be accused of being emotional. Downstairs, voices murmured, "She'll understand. It's for the best. Temporary." I wondered when temporary became permanent without announcing itself. I carried the first box downstairs. Daniel stood when he saw me. "Do you want help?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded and sat back down. I set the box by the door and went back upstairs for another. The house felt heavier each time I crossed it, like gravity had shifted. When I came down the last time, I stopped in the living room. "I need to ask you something," I said. Daniel looked up. "When did you stop seeing me as part of this?" I asked. He swallowed. "I don't know," he said. "It just changed." "No," I said gently. "Things don't just change, they move." Evelyn spoke then. "You've always been welcome here," she said. "Welcome, like a guest." "This isn't about welcome," I replied. "It's about ownership, presence, choice." No one argued. That was the answer. I picked up the last box and headed for the door. Daniel followed me out onto the porch. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's what makes it worse." I walked to my car and set the box inside. When I closed the trunk, the sound echoed louder than it should have, and no one rushed to soften it. I drove away. That night, back in the motel, I opened the envelope Evelyn had given me. Inside were copies, legal language, polite explanations, adjustments framed as fairness. My name was there, but smaller, reduced. They hadn't erased me, they'd minimized me. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, methodically. Each rotation felt like time acknowledging itself. I slept in fragments, dreamed of rooms that locked themselves. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered, and nothing rushed back into place. I dressed, drove, sat in a cafe where no one knew my story and no one tried to manage it. I ordered coffee, black. It tasted right. My phone buzzed again. A message from Rachel. "Mom thinks you're taking this too personally." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Too personally, as if losing your place in your own life could be anything else. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my bag and felt the weight of my keys. The house key sat there with the others, smooth, familiar. I held it in my palm for a long moment. Then I slid it off the ring. Not dramatically, just deliberately. Some things take time to release. I placed the key in my pocket and stood. Outside, the air felt sharper, clearer, like the day had been waiting for me to stop pretending. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, I imagined turning back, knocking it in, asking for what I should have asked months ago. Then I imagined staying. Neither image held me. I started the engine and drove forward. The tires made that soft crunch over old gravel, the kind that sounds loud only when you're alone in the car and your thoughts are already too awake. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did: trim hedges, porch swings, American flags that never came down, wreaths still hanging even though the season had moved on. But my chest didn't recognize it. It felt like I was pulling up to a place that had learned how to live without my permission. I turned onto our street and slowed down out of habit, like the road had rules I'd followed my whole life. There was that same maple tree on the corner, the one Jason and I used to point at every fall and say, "Look, it's starting again." Only now the leaves were gone. Bare branches held up against the sky like hands asking a question nobody wanted to answer. When I got closer, I saw the porch light was on. Not bright, not welcoming, just on, like a signal, like someone had left it there for appearances. There were cars in the driveway. Not mine, not Jason's. Two vehicles I didn't recognize at first, one a dark SUV, the other a small sedan parked a little crooked like the driver hadn't cared enough to straighten it. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something older. Like when you walk into a room and the conversation stops and you can feel your name sitting on their tongues. I pulled in behind them and sat there. Just sat. The engine ran, the heat blew, the dashboard clock glowed blue, and I watched my own front window like it might blink. The curtains were open. I could see movement inside, shadows crossing the living room, a figure passing by the lamp. Normal things. Domestic things. But it made me feel like I was looking through glass at someone else's life. I turned the engine off. The silence that came after felt too clean, like someone had wiped the air down. When I opened the car door, the cold hit my face and the smell of wet pavement came up, sharp and honest. The porch steps creaked the way they always did. Even the house remembered its habits. But nobody came to the door. Nobody called out my name. I stood on the porch a second longer than usual, staring at the doorknob, the little scratch near the lock from when Jason tried to fix it years ago and made it worse. I had laughed then. Now I just touched the scratch with my thumb like it was proof that I had once belonged here. I let myself in. The door wasn't locked. That detail, small, stupid, made my stomach clench. Because locked doors mean you're keeping strangers out. Unlocked doors mean you're not worried about what comes in. Or you've forgotten what it feels like to be careful. Warm air wrapped around me. The house smelled like coffee and something sweet, like cinnamon. Someone had been baking. In my kitchen. My boots made soft thuds on the entryway rug. And still, no one came. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not loud, not cruel, just easy. The kind that slips out when you're comfortable. The kind of sound that doesn't pause to check who might be listening. I moved toward the living room slowly. The light was on, bright enough to show everything too clearly. Folded throws on the couch, a neat stack of mail on the side table, the family photos on the wall that were still mine, still us. But the room felt staged, like the furniture had been rearranged around an absence. Jason's mother, Linda, was sitting in my armchair. My armchair. The one I used to curl up in when I couldn't sleep. She was holding a mug like she owned the heat inside it. Her hair was done, neat, and her sweater looked soft and expensive, the kind she always wore when she wanted to seem harmless. Beside the couch, Jason's sister Megan stood with a phone in her hand, half smiling at something on the screen, like she'd been there a while. Like she'd been here long enough to stop being careful. And on the couch, on the cushion Jason used to sit on, there was a teenage boy I didn't recognize, legs stretched out, shoes still on, scrolling like the house belonged to his boredom. I stopped in the doorway. Not dramatically, just stopped. Because my body needed a moment to understand what my eyes were seeing. Linda looked up first. Her smile came quickly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, like she'd forgotten I existed and remembered too late. "You're home." Megan glanced up after, eyes flicking over me like a quick inventory. The boy didn't even look. And the air between us filled with something thin and sharp. Polite surprise. Like I had interrupted something. I heard myself say, "Yeah." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. I set my bag down by the door, slow and careful, like sudden movement might make the moment break apart. "Where's Jason?" I asked. Megan's mouth tightened, just slightly, like a thread being pulled. Linda took a sip of her coffee. She let the silence sit a beat too long. Then she said, "He's not here right now." Not, "He's out," not, "He's running errands," not, "He'll be back soon," just, "Not here right now." As if the house could hold his absence comfortably. I looked past them, toward the hallway. The walls were the same, the family photos were the same, but the house felt occupied in a way it hadn't felt in months, lived in, not by me. I swallowed. "Why are you here?" I asked, and it came out softer than it should have, like I was asking permission to be confused. Linda set her mug down carefully on the coaster. That tiny, controlled movement told me everything. She had practiced for this. She said, "We needed to talk." Megan's eyes dropped back to her phone, pretending she wasn't part of it. And that boy, still scrolling, shifted his feet and kicked his heel against the coffee table like he was getting comfortable. I stared at the shoes on my rug. The audacity of that small thing made my skin go hot. Linda patted the arm of the chair like she was inviting me into a conversation I hadn't agreed to. "Come sit," she said. "You look tired." I didn't move. I stood right where I was because standing felt like the only way to keep myself from shrinking. "I am tired," I said, "so just tell me." Linda's eyes softened the way a nurse's do when they're about to give bad news. "You've been under a lot," she said, "and we've been worried." I almost laughed, because worry looks like a phone call. Worry looks like showing up at your door and asking if you're okay. This looked like someone moving into your space and calling it concern. Megan finally spoke. Her voice was light, too light. "We didn't want you to come home to an empty house," she said. I blinked at her. "An empty house?" I repeated. Linda leaned forward slightly. "You can't keep living like this," she said. "Not alone. Not in this condition." My hand went instinctively to my stomach, not because I was pregnant, because I wasn't, because the words hit like something physical. "In this condition," I said quietly, like I was broken furniture, like I was a mess that needed managing. The boy on the couch snorted, small and thoughtless, like he'd heard adults talk like this before and it had never cost him anything. I looked at him then. He finally glanced up, eyes dull with teenage indifference. Linda noticed my look. "That's Ethan," she said quickly, "Megan's son." Megan's son, in my house, shoes on my rug, breathing my air like it was his. I nodded once, not because I accepted it, because my mind was trying to hold on to the shape of reality. "Okay," I said. "Why is Ethan here?" Linda's fingers tightened on the armrest. Megan answered, "Because he's with me." "And why are you with him here?" I asked. Linda's voice turned gentle again, like she was coaxing a frightened animal. "We've been helping Jason," she said. My stomach dropped. Helping Jason? Like Jason was the one who needed rescuing? Helping him with what? I asked. Linda sighed like I was asking something unreasonable. "With everything," she said. "With the home, with stability, with the stress." Megan added, "You haven't exactly been easy to be around lately." That sentence was a slap dressed up as truth. I stared at her. "I haven't been easy?" I said. Megan shrugged, small and practiced. "You're always tense, always suspicious, always acting like we're doing something to you." I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because the part of me that wanted to defend myself was exhausted, and the part of me that recognized the pattern, this slow turning of the story until I was the problem, felt ice cold. Linda stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She walked toward me like she had every right to cross the room in my own home. She said, "We don't want conflict. That's not why we're here." Her hands were open at her sides, palms slightly forward like peace offerings, but her eyes were firm. Her eyes were already decided. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that never changed even when everything else did. She said, "Jason has been through so much." I felt my jaw tighten. "And I haven't?" I whispered. Linda's face shifted just slightly, impatience hidden under sympathy. "You're strong," she said. "You'll be okay." That's what people say when they want you to stop needing things, when they want your pain to be convenient. I looked past her toward the kitchen. On the counter, there was a baking dish, a towel draped over it, like someone had been making themselves at home. On the fridge, I noticed something else, a small magnet, new, a calendar page, new. The handwriting wasn't mine. My throat tightened. I walked toward the kitchen without asking permission. Linda followed, her steps calm. Megan stayed behind, but I could feel her watching. The kitchen light was on, brighter than usual. The sink was empty, clean. Someone had wiped down my counters. It should have looked nice. It should have felt like help, but it felt like erasure. I opened the fridge. Milk, eggs, a carton of orange juice I didn't buy, leftovers in containers I didn't recognize. I closed it slowly. Then I turned around. Linda stood there with her hands folded. Megan had come closer now, leaning on the doorway like she belonged there. Ethan's laughter came faintly from the living room, like he'd found something funny on his phone. I looked at Linda. "Where is Jason?" I asked again. Linda's voice lowered. "In the den," she said, "resting." Resting, as if he was a guest here too. I walked down the hallway. Each step felt like walking through a version of my life that had been quietly rearranged. The family photo at the end of the hall, Jason and me at the beach, was still there, but it looked different now, like even the smiles were outdated. When I reached the den, the door was half closed. I pushed it open. Jason was there, sitting in the dim light on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, like he'd been waiting. He looked up at me, and for a second, just a second, I saw something in his face that almost looked like shame. Then it slid away. He stood up slowly. "Hey," he said, like we were normal, like this was a regular Tuesday. I stared at him. My voice came out then. "Why are they in our house?" I asked. Jason exhaled. He rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't look at me when he said it. "They're just helping out." Helping out, the same words, like they'd rehearsed them in the car on the way here. I took one step closer. "Helping out with what?" I asked. Jason's eyes flicked up, then away again. "With things," he said. "With me. With you. Not with us, not with our marriage, not with the home we built. With him." I felt something inside me go very still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm, but quiet enough that nobody else notices. I whispered, "Since when do you need your mom to manage your life?" Jason flinched, barely. He said, "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" I asked, and my voice started to shake just a little. "Ask questions?" Jason's jaw tightened. "Make it sound like everyone's against you," he said. I laughed once, small and bitter. "I walked into my own home and found your mother in my chair, your sister baking in my kitchen, and a stranger on my couch." Jason's voice rose slightly. "Ethan's not a stranger." "He is to me," I said. Jason looked down. Linda appeared in the doorway behind me, quiet, watching. Megan stood further back in the hall, arms crossed. It was like they'd positioned themselves, like I was in the center of a room that had already chosen sides. Jason said, "We need to talk about what happens next." My heart thudded. "What happens next?" I repeated. Jason nodded. His voice softened, and somehow that made it worse. "We've been thinking," he said, "that maybe you should take some time, get some space." Space. From my home. From my life. From the place I had been holding together while he drifted. I stared at him. My mouth went dry. "You want me to leave?" I said. Jason didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just looked tired. And in that look was something colder than anger. Something like relief. Like he was relieved someone else had finally said the part he didn't want to carry. Linda stepped forward. Her voice was gentle again. "Just for a little while," she said, "until things calm down." I turned slowly. I looked at her, then at Megan, then at Jason, and I realized something that made my hands go numb. They weren't asking. They were informing. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision they'd made while I was out living my day, thinking the house would still be mine when I came back. And the worst part? The house was quiet. It didn't defend me. It didn't protest. It just held their voices like it had always held mine. I took a breath. It sounded too loud in my ears. I said very softly, Where am I supposed to go? Jason swallowed. He looked at Linda like she'd give him the answer, and Linda did. We can help you with a hotel, she said, or your sister, if you want. My sister. Someone else's home. Someone else's rules. Someone else's couch. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because my body didn't know what else to do with the shock. Jason stepped closer. He reached out like he might touch my arm. I leaned back without thinking. His hand froze midair. He lowered it, and in that tiny moment I saw the distance between us like a physical thing, a hallway we couldn't cross anymore. Linda said, "We're doing what's best." I looked at Jason again. He still wouldn't meet my eyes properly. And that's when I understood. This wasn't about what was best. This was about what was easiest. It was easier to move me out than to face what had broken. Easier to call me unstable than admit they'd changed the locks on my life. I walked past them, down the hallway, back into the kitchen where the cinnamon smell lingered like a lie. I picked up my bag from the entryway. My keys were in my hand. My coat was still on, like I had never truly come inside. Linda said my name behind me, soft, almost kind. I didn't turn, because if I turned, I might crumble, and no one in that room looked like they'd catch me. I stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit my face again. The porch light shone down on the steps like a spotlight on a goodbye I hadn't rehearsed. I walked to my car. Each step felt unreal, like I was watching someone else do it. I got in, closed the door. The sound of it shutting felt final, and no one rushed to soften the sound. I sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, breathing shallow, looking at the house, at the window, at the warm light inside that used to mean safety. Now it just meant they were comfortable without me. I turned the key, the engine started, and for a moment I thought, maybe I should honk, maybe I should scream, maybe I should do something that proves I exist. But I didn't. I just put the car in reverse, backed out slowly, and drove forward, not knowing where I was going, only knowing I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. And as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I realized something that made my throat burn. I wasn't leaving a home. I was leaving the version of myself that still believed love automatically meant belonging. And somewhere deep down, a quieter thought followed behind that one. A thought that didn't feel like pain yet. It felt like warning. They didn't just take my place in that house. They were trying to take my story, too. The motel room smelled like lemon cleaner and something older that never quite left. I locked the door behind me and leaned my back against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The carpet was thin, rough. I could feel the outline of the concrete beneath it. I stayed there longer than I meant to, not crying, not praying, just breathing. Each breath felt like something I had to consciously allow. I stood eventually, habit again, survival dressed up as routine. I placed my bag on the bed, set my keys beside it. The house key lay among the others, dull and familiar, like it didn't yet know what had happened. I turned on the lamp. The light was too bright. I turned it off and sat in the dark instead. This wasn't how I imagined leaving my life. I thought if something ever ended, there would be clarity, a moment where everything made sense because it had to. Instead, there was just this, quiet displacement, like I'd been gently pushed out of a moving line without anyone noticing the gap. I checked my phone. No messages. That hurt more than the ones I hadn't replied to. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. There was a faint water stain near the corner, a shape that looked almost intentional if you didn't stare too long. I thought about how many nights I'd lain awake in my own bedroom, listening for Daniel's breathing beside me, measuring my sleep against his, trying to sync myself to a rhythm that no longer included me. The truth arrived slowly, painfully. They hadn't just made space for me to leave, they had prepared for it. The calendar, the reorganized kitchen, the boxes upstairs. This wasn't a reaction, it was a transition, and I was the only one who hadn't been informed. I sat up. The room felt smaller now, or maybe I was finally noticing how much space I took when I wasn't trying to disappear. I reached for my phone again, scrolled, paused. There was a name I hadn't called in years. Marianne, Daniel's aunt. Not close, not distant, just observant. The kind of woman who listened more than she spoke and remembered things people assumed didn't matter. I stared at her name for a long time. Then I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was steady, unrushed. It's me, I said. A pause. Then, I know. That stopped me. You know? I asked. I heard, she said gently. I closed my eyes. How? I asked. She didn't answer right away. I was there in January, she said, when they started talking about changes. My stomach dropped. January, again. What kind of changes? I asked. She sighed. The kind people make when they've already decided who's inconvenient. The words landed clean and sharp. They said you were tired, she continued, that you needed rest, that the house felt tense. I laughed once, short, humorless. And what did you say? I asked. I asked where you were in all those conversations, she replied. Silence stretched between us. And? I asked. They said you wouldn't understand. That was it. Not that I wouldn't agree, not that I would refuse, that I wouldn't understand, as if I hadn't been understanding my whole life. I'm in a motel, I said quietly. I figured, she replied. You were always the one who moved first. I swallowed. They're acting like they're helping me, I said. Yes, she said. That's how people justify things they don't want to own. I pressed my palm against my forehead. How long? I asked. How long what? How long was I being edged out? I said. She didn't hesitate. Years, she said, just slowly enough that you blamed yourself instead of them. The room felt like it tilted. Years. I thanked her. Not formally, just honestly. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet with that word echoing. Years. I thought about all the moments I'd explained away, the dinners I wasn't invited to, the decisions made without me, the way my opinions became stress reactions. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being displaced. I stood and walked to the bathroom. The mirror there was cracked at the corner, like someone had hit it and stopped short of shattering. I looked at my reflection. I looked older than I felt, but I also looked awake. That mattered. I splashed water on my face, cold, real. I didn't cry. Something else was happening now, something quieter, something steadier. I picked up the envelope Evelyn had given me, the one I hadn't opened yet. It sat on the bedside table like an accusation. I opened it. The papers were neatly organized, highlighted, sticky notes marking sections that mattered. Ownership percentages, temporary living arrangements, language that softened removal into transition. My name was still there, but not where it used to be. I read every line, slowly, carefully, the way you read something when you know it will cost you either way. They hadn't taken the house outright. They had just made it impossible for me to live there comfortably. That was the trick. Pressure without force. Control without fingerprints. I set the papers down. I wasn't angry yet. I was clear. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months, not because I was safe, but because I had stopped waiting. In the morning, I woke before the sun. The motel parking lot was quiet. A few cars, no one rushing, no one managing anyone else. I made coffee in the small machine by the sink. Black. I drank it standing up. I thought about calling Daniel, not to argue, not to beg, to say one thing. But when I imagined his voice, the weight of explaining myself returned, and I didn't want to carry it anymore. I checked out instead. The clerk didn't ask why. I drove toward the edge of town, past places I used to frequent, past turns I'd taken without thinking. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Mom says you're overreacting. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I read it twice. Overreacting. That word had followed me for years. Whenever I noticed patterns, whenever I named discomfort, whenever I refused to smile through erasure. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted that too. Then I wrote, "I'm not making this harder. I'm just not making it easier for you anymore." I sent it. The light turned green. I drove. Later that afternoon, I found myself in a small public library. I don't know why. I hadn't planned it. My body just took me there. The building smelled like paper and quiet intention. I sat at a long wooden table and stared at nothing for a while. Then I pulled out a notebook, a blank one. I hadn't written anything for myself in years. Not lists, not reminders, not compromises disguised as plans. I wrote my name at the top of the page, just my name. It felt strange, like reclaiming something no one realized I'd lost. I wrote down what I knew, what I owned, what I didn't, what I wanted, what I refused to apologize for anymore. The list wasn't long, but it was honest. When I closed the notebook, something settled in me. Not resolve, not revenge, just direction. That evening, I booked a longer stay somewhere else. Not a motel, a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing special, but it was quiet, clean, mine. When I unlocked the door for the first time, the rooms echoed, empty. I stood in the middle of the living room and let the sounds surround me. This time, the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like possibility. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and breathed. I wasn't home yet, but I was no longer homeless inside myself. And somewhere, deep in that quiet, another truth rose, steady and undeniable. They thought removing me would restore peace. They didn't realize they'd removed the person who kept everything balanced. The house would learn that, just not with me inside it. That thought followed me into the apartment like a shadow that finally knew its shape. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in a long while, the sound didn't feel like rejection. It felt neutral, honest, a door doing what doors are meant to do. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, listening. No humming refrigerator I didn't recognize, no footsteps moving around me, no voices arranging the air, just quiet. The living room was empty except for a single window and a patch of late afternoon light resting on the floor like it had been waiting. The walls were bare. The air smelled faintly of paint and dust and something unfinished. I set my bag down and walked slowly from room to room. Each step echoed, not accusingly, not loudly, just enough to remind me I was present. The kitchen was small, clean, no extra mugs, no reorganized cabinets, no calendar on the fridge telling me where I needed to be. I opened a drawer, empty. I closed it again and smiled beside myself. This place didn't know me yet. That mattered. I sat on the floor in the middle of the living room and leaned back against the wall. The coolness seeped through my clothes, grounding me. I stretched my legs out in front of me and rested my hands on my knees. I waited for something to hit me. Grief, anger, regret. What came instead was a strange, cautious calm, like standing on land after a long time at sea and realizing your body hasn't forgotten how to be still. It just needed permission. I thought about the house again, the one with the maple tree and the crooked hook that someone had fixed. I imagined Evelyn moving through the kitchen, Megan's voice drifting down the hall, Jason sitting quietly in the den. I imagined the balance they thought they'd restored, and for the first time, I wondered how long it would last without me absorbing the weight. That night, I slept on the floor. I didn't bother unpacking. I used my jacket as a pillow, folded enough to make it work. The apartment cooled as the sun went down, and the sounds of the city softened into a distant hum. I slept deeply, not dreamlessly, but honestly. I woke before dawn, light spilling through the window in pale strips. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, and the memory didn't sting. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, listening to my own breathing. It sounded steady, uninterrupted. I made coffee on the small counter with a borrowed mug I'd picked up on the way over. It didn't match anything. It didn't need to. I drank it slowly, standing by the window, watching the street wake up. Someone walked a dog. A bus sighed to a stop. A man unlocked his shop and paused to stretch. Life, uncurated. I felt adjacent to it. Later that morning, I went back to the motel to pick up the last of my things. The clerk nodded as I returned the key, her expression practiced but kind. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And for the first time, it felt true without effort. Back in the car, my phone buzzed again, a message from Jason. "We should talk. This doesn't have to get complicated." I stared at the words, complicated, as if it hadn't already been carefully arranged. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to a hardware store and bought a cheap set of plates, 2 cups, a small lamp, things that belonged nowhere yet. When I returned to the apartment, I set them down slowly, deliberately, each item placed without consultation, without compromise. Ownership, practiced in small ways. That afternoon, I received an email from a lawyer. Brief, polite, efficient. They'd been instructed to clarify arrangements. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Marianne with a simple message. "I think it's time." She replied less than an hour later. "I'll connect you with someone. You're not wrong to ask questions now." That sentence stayed with me. Not wrong. I hadn't realized how often I'd framed my discomfort as a flaw instead of a signal. That evening, I sat on the floor again and opened the notebook. I added to the list things I noticed but ignored, moments that didn't sit right, decisions made without me, patterns formed. They always do when you finally stop interrupting your own memory. I closed the notebook and rested my palm on it like a promise. The next few days passed quietly. I went to work, came back, ate simply, slept deeply. No one rearranged my schedule. No one commented on my tone. No one told me I was overreacting. The silence here didn't demand explanation. On the 4th day, I drove past the old house without planning to. I didn't slow down. I saw the porch light was off this time, the curtains closed, the driveway crowded. I imagined tension sitting at the kitchen table where calm used to be. I imagined decisions piling up without anyone absorbing them. I didn't feel satisfaction, just distance. That night, Daniel called. I let it ring. Then, without deciding to, I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded tired. "I got your message," I replied. Silence. "They're worried," he said. "I'm sure they are," I answered. "This isn't how we planned it," he added. I almost laughed. "Then how did you plan it?" I asked. Another pause. "We thought you'd cool down, that you'd realize we were just trying to help." Help. I closed my eyes. You didn't help me, I said calmly. You helped yourselves feel more comfortable. That's not fair, he replied. It's accurate, I said. He sighed. You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be. No, I said. I'm seeing it clearly for the first time. He didn't respond. I continued. You removed me quietly because you thought I'd accept it quietly. I don't need to scream to refuse. His breathing changed. What do you want? He asked. The question surprised me. I thought about it. I want you to stop talking about me like I'm a problem you solved and start talking to me like a person you made a choice about. Silence again. I don't know if I can do that, he said finally. I know, I replied. We hung up after that, not angry, just done. I sat there in the quiet and felt something settle completely. Not grief, acceptance, the kind that doesn't beg for understanding anymore. That weekend, I bought a plant, a small one, sturdy, green. I placed it near the window and watered it carefully. Roots, like room. The apartment began to change slowly after that. A chair, a rug, a rhythm. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. I started taking longer walks in the evening, letting my body remember it didn't need permission to exist in space. I noticed how often I smiled without realizing it. One afternoon, as I unlocked the apartment door, I paused. The sound of the lock turning felt right, claimed. Inside, the air was still, empty in the way beginnings are empty. I set my keys down on the counter. The house key was no longer with them. I hadn't noticed when that happened. Some releases don't announce themselves. I looked around the room. This place wasn't impressive, it wasn't permanent, it wasn't full yet, but it was honest. And as I stood there, surrounded by a life that wasn't being curated by anyone else, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Belonging isn't about who lets you stay. It's about where you don't have to ask. I turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not, but this time I would meet it from inside my own space. And that was enough. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came the way weather does, slow shifts you don't notice until you're already standing in a different season. The first sign was small, a message from a mutual friend who didn't know which version of the story to believe and didn't want to ask outright. A careful, hope you're okay, that carried more curiosity than concern. I replied with a simple, I am. Nothing else. I wasn't ready to narrate myself back into a place I'd been edited out of. At work, my focus sharpened, not because I was trying harder, because I wasn't carrying other people's balance anymore. I finished tasks faster. I spoke less. When I did speak, it landed clean. People noticed. Something's different, a coworker said one afternoon, smiling like she meant it as a compliment. I nodded. It was. The lawyer Marianne connected me with was unassuming, middle-aged, quiet voice. He read more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was precise. He didn't react when I explained the situation. That steadiness told me everything. This isn't uncommon, he said. What matters is what you want now. The question felt unfamiliar. What I want, I repeated. Yes, he said, not what you're willing to tolerate. I took a breath. I want clarity, I said, and I don't want to be managed anymore. He nodded. Then we proceed carefully. Careful didn't mean passive. It meant documented, measured, unavoidable. Letters were sent, requests were formalized, boundaries were defined in language that didn't flinch. I felt steadier with every step, not empowered exactly, just aligned. Meanwhile, the house began to push back. I didn't hear about it right away. People rarely volunteer discomfort when they think it proves you wrong, but it surfaced in fragments. A voicemail Daniel left and deleted before I could answer. A text from Megan that read, "Can we please talk like adults?" A sudden urgency in Evelyn's tone when she reached out just to check in. I didn't respond immediately. I waited. That was new. When I did reply, I kept it brief, polite, neutral, no explanations. The balance they thought they'd restored was shifting, and without me absorbing the weight, it was redistributing itself unevenly. One afternoon, Marianne called. "They weren't expecting you to ask for records," she said. I smiled faintly. "No one expects the quiet one to count," I replied. She laughed once, short, appreciative. "They're scrambling," she added, "not panicking, but adjusting." Adjusting. The word used to belong to me. At night in the apartment, I began to feel something new settle in. Ownership, not of things, of space. I rearranged the furniture twice before it felt right, hung a single photograph by the window, bought a heavier blanket. I started cooking again, not elaborate meals, just enough to remind myself I could choose flavors without consensus. One evening, while washing dishes, I realized I was humming. The sound startled me. It had been a long time since my body had made music without permission. The call from Daniel came late. He didn't preface it with concern this time. "We need to talk," he said. "I know," I replied. We met at a cafe halfway between our places, neutral ground, public enough to behave. He looked tired, not wounded, worn. Evelyn wasn't there. Megan wasn't there. That mattered. He said, "They're upset," he said, sitting down. "I'm sure," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "They didn't think it would go like this. I told you, you don't get to decide how people respond to being removed." He flinched. "I didn't remove you," he said. I met his eyes. "I let you be removed," I replied. Silence stretched between us. "I didn't think you'd push back," he admitted. There it was. "I know," I said. He stared at his coffee. "I thought you'd understand." "I did," I said. "That was the problem." He looked up then. Really looked. "You're different," he said. I smiled. "I'm uninterrupted." He exhaled. "They're saying you're being difficult." "I'm being exact," I replied. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. I considered that. "I'm not asking you to fix it," I said. "I'm asking you to stop pretending it broke on its own." He didn't argue. That felt like something. After that meeting, the pace changed. Responses came faster. Language softened. Offers appeared. Compromise arrived wearing humility. I didn't accept everything. I didn't reject everything either. I chose. That was the reckoning. The house, my former house, began to feel smaller in stories people told me. Tense dinners, short tempers, quiet disagreements surfacing where I used to smooth them over. I didn't take satisfaction in it. I took distance. One night, Marianne called again. "They want mediation," she said. I closed my eyes and nodded. Good. When mediation came, it was controlled, structured, professional. No raised voices, just truths that couldn't hide behind tone. I spoke calmly, clearly, without apology. I named patterns, I cited dates, I described impact without assigning character. The room changed. People always expect emotion from the person who endured. They're less prepared for accuracy. Afterward, Daniel walked me to my car. "I didn't realize how much you carried," he said quietly. "I did," I replied. "I just didn't realize I could set it down." He nodded. "I hope you're happy," he said. I thought about the apartment, the plant by the window, the notebook filling slowly with plans that belonged to me. "I'm honest," I said. "That's better." He watched me drive away. This time I didn't look back. Weeks passed. Life settled into something sturdy, not perfect, not dramatic, just mine. The final paperwork arrived on a Tuesday, clean, clear, final. I signed it without ceremony. When I left the office, the sky was wide and undecided, the kind of day that didn't promise anything, but didn't threaten either. I drove home, my home, unlocked the door. The plant had grown a little. I watered it. That evening, I sat on the floor with the notebook and wrote one last line under the lists and dates and truths. I stayed longer than I should have because I thought belonging was something you earn. I closed the notebook. The reckoning was complete. What came next would be quieter, but it would be mine. That certainty didn't arrive with fireworks or relief. It settled the way dust does after a long drive, quietly, evenly, covering everything that had been exposed. I noticed it in the mornings first, the way I woke up without bracing myself, the way my body didn't tense before my feet touched the floor, the way the silence didn't ask me to fill it. I started leaving the curtains open at night, letting the streetlight cast its pale square across the living room floor. I liked knowing where the light came from. I liked that nothing in this space tried to surprise me. Some mornings I sat on the floor with the back against the couch and drank my coffee slowly, not because I was tired, but because I could. The mug warmed my hands, the room stayed still. No one rearranged anything while I slept. That still felt like a gift. I thought about the house less often than I expected. When it did come to mind, it arrived without sharp edges, more like a place I used to live near than something I left behind. I stopped checking the driveway in passing, stopped scanning windows for signs, stopped wondering who was inside. Instead, I started noticing myself again. The way I preferred the lamp angled slightly left, the way I liked the radio on low while I cooked, the way I folded laundry methodically, not rushed. Small truths returned to me like lost items showing up in coat pockets months later. One evening, I found a scratch on the wall near the door, something from moving furniture too quickly. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled. I didn't rush to cover it. Some marks don't mean damage, they mean presence. Mary Ann called once more, just to check in. "You sound settled," she said. "I am," I replied. She paused. "That's different from happy." "Yes," I said, "but it lasts longer." She laughed softly. After that, the calls stopped. Not abruptly, naturally. That's how endings should happen, I thought, without someone needing to declare them. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I unpacked the last box. It had been sitting in the corner for weeks, untouched. Inside were old photos, papers I hadn't needed, a scarf I'd forgotten I loved. I sorted through them carefully. Some things I kept, some I didn't. I let go without ceremony. I realized then how different it felt to choose release instead of being pushed toward it. That night, I dreamed of rooms opening instead of closing. I woke smiling. Time passed, not dramatically, just steadily. I learned which grocery store felt right, which route home calmed me the fastest, which chair near the window caught the afternoon sun just enough. I started inviting people over, not many, just those who didn't need explanations. The apartment learned my voice, my steps, my habits. It remembered me the way houses do when you let them. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked older, quieter, more myself than I'd been in years. I held my gaze for a moment. "I didn't disappear," I said softly. "I was just waiting." No one answered. That was fine. Later, as I turned off the lights and moved toward the bedroom, I paused in the doorway. I listened to the space behind me. The apartment didn't hold its breath. It rested. I lay down and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The plant by the window rustled slightly as the air shifted. I made a mental note to water it in the morning. Roots like room. Before sleep took me, one last thought surfaced. Not bitter, not heavy, just clear. I hadn't lost a home. I had outgrown a place that needed me small. And now, finally, I was living somewhere that let me take up space without apology. Tomorrow would come, and whatever it brought, I would meet it from inside a life that was no longer shared by default, but chosen deliberately. The last thing to change was the sound, not outside, inside. The constant low hum I'd lived with for years, the tension I'd mistaken for responsibility, faded so gradually I didn't notice it leave. One day, it was simply gone. I realized it on an ordinary morning. Sunlight slipped through the window and landed on the floor near the plant. The leaves had grown fuller, leaning slightly toward the glass like they trusted the light to return. I stood there in my socks, holding my coffee, and felt steady. Not happy. Steady. There was no rush in my chest, no need to anticipate someone else's mood, no instinct to prepare explanations for decisions I hadn't made yet. Just presence. I drank my coffee slowly and listened to the building wake up around me. A door closing somewhere down the hall, water running, footsteps overhead. Other lives, close by, but not overlapping. That distinction mattered more than I'd known it would. Later that day, I found the old house key in the pocket of a coat I hadn't worn since winter. I held it between my fingers, surprised by its weight. How familiar it still felt. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel loss. I felt gratitude for the clarity that had come with letting it go. I placed the key on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened a drawer and set it inside. Not thrown away, not displayed, just finished. That evening I went for a walk as the sky began to dim. The neighborhood smelled like cut grass and warm pavement. Porch lights flickered on one by one, homes settling into themselves. I passed families at dinner tables, couples laughing, a woman watering her plants with careful attention. Everyone belonged somewhere, and so did I. But my belonging no longer depended on who else was inside the walls with me. As I walked back toward the apartment, I felt something loosen in my chest, not because I'd won, not because anyone else had lost, but because the shape of my life finally matched the size of my breath. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar click sounded right. I cooked dinner without following a recipe, ate when I was hungry, stopped when I was full, left the dishes for later because nothing required immediate perfection. That kind of freedom had once scared me. Now it felt like truth. Before bed, I opened the notebook one last time. I flipped through pages filled with lists, dates, realizations, evidence of a woman waking up to herself slowly. On the last page, I wrote, "I am not difficult. I am not too much. I was simply in a place that required me to disappear." I closed the notebook and set it on the shelf. I didn't need to reread it again. Some truths only need to be written once. That night, as I lay in bed, the city hummed softly outside the window. Sirens in the distance, a train horn far away, life moving, unconcerned. I felt no urge to follow it. I was already where I needed to be. Sleep came easily. In the morning, I woke with a lightness that surprised me. Not joy exactly, but readiness, the kind that doesn't demand answers before moving forward. I opened the curtains fully this time. The day stepped in. I stood there for a moment, barefoot on the floor, and let myself take up the space without apology. The room didn't resist. It welcomed. Somewhere else, I knew, the old house was continuing on, adjusting, filling gaps, learning what it meant to exist without the quiet labor that had once held it together. I didn't wish it harm. I didn't wish it anything at all. My life was no longer shaped by reaction. It was shaped by choice. I turned away from the window and began the day. No audience, no permission, no need to explain, just movement, forward, honest. And as the door closed behind me, not loudly, not softly, just normally, I understood the final truth of it all. A home isn't where everyone lives. It's where you don't have to disappear to stay. And this life, this space, this quiet was finally, completely mine. Thank you for watching. Your trust, your time, and your support truly mean everything. If this video brought you value, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach those who need it most. Stay focused, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.